That engine right there started it all.
I'm humbled to show you this, the core of my turbo 4-rotor.
That engine right there was meant to go in the car behind it, and as many of you know, that is not the case. You all know this car. But what good is a body without a heart? And it is here. The car ended up getting a billet engine. It has been running beautifully this entire time. All of the dyno sessions. Everything has just been done on that engine. So what happens to this little guy right here? It's finally time for me to formally announce the plans for that. And as the title suggests, I am putting that engine into a C8 Corvette. A lot of you have linked to me the orange one that was hit in an unfortunate accident within 24 hours of ownership. But no, we're going to start fresh. And I'm going to acquire a brand new Chevy Corvette C8 to do the most nefarious thing ever. This plan isn't as weird as you might think. It was done once before. Not only was it done by GM themselves. Back in the 1970s, there was a prototype vehicle called the Aerovette. It was one of Chevy's attempts at doing something radically different, and it was a mid-engine Corvette. It was based off of a totally different chassis. It doesn't look like any of the Corvettes you've ever seen. One of the most unique things about it was it had a 4-rotor engine in it.
Once on the move, the Corvette 4-rotor Idea car is a pleasure. It features a 6.4-liter displacement rotary engine mounted amidships.
There's also a version that came out that had a 2-rotor engine. What's interesting is neither of these are Mazda rotaries. They are very unique to those vehicles. If you were at Amelia Island this year, it was on display. I've talked to the owner. He brought it over from England. He actually was a friend of the guys that worked on the project and was able to keep it. Of course, now it's worth a lot of money, and it's a very unique vehicle that should never have left the prototyping phase. And as you guys know, I made my own prototype right back there, the C5 Rotary Vet. Hi, I'm Rob Dahm. And this is how you properly weight balance a Corvette. Of course, that has the 2-rotor, and that is the one that snuck into LS Fest and then broke down. So that puts me here. This engine is the original engine. This engine was what started the channel's whole dream of having a 4-rotor. This was bought back in 2015 with the intention of building this car. When I purchased it, I purchased the E-shaft, which is now over with Logan from Defined Autoworks, as he goes to balance that with the 4 rotors he's acquired for me. Those are all paid for. I've now bought 8 rotors for this engine. And of course, the front and rear counterweights. So that leaves what looks like an empty block. There are some very interesting things about this, and we're going to go ahead and tear it apart. It's finally time to announce that Valvoline is a huge partner of this channel. Many of you know that I've been using 2050 Valvoline VR1 in the 4-rotor as well as the 3-rotor, doing all of the high horsepower attempts.
You have to look up at the camera and say, thank you, Valvoline, for this.
Thank you, Valvoline.
I did use other oils to break the engine in, and I've had wonderful success with all of that. But it is VR1 2050 that I've been using this entire time. It's liquid gold. It's been making all that power. I haven't even changed the oil since doing all of those runs. Elliot from Turbone would be upset with me because I told him I did. It's got 15 quarts of VR1 in there, and that has made this whole process possible. I have not had any problems with the engine, with the drivetrain, nothing. The entire drivetrain uses Valvoline as well.
You want to cross streams? Yeah. I was never. Have you seen Ghostbusters? It's never a good thing.
There's a variety of gear oil as well as ATF, all made possible by Valvoline. And that was long before they even were a partner in the channel. And so with Valvoline's involvement, we're going to do some crazy things over this whole year. Not only making the C8 rotary swap possible, but also analyzing the type of oil and making sure that we're doing the right things with rotaries, because you know how insane rotary enthusiasts are about their choices of oil. This is one of the most exciting things about YouTube, is to be able to have partners that you truly use their products and they work really well. Not only that, there may be a chance to go look at their lab and analyze the oil and learn a lot more about how oil is used in such a finicky engine. Of course, we can all agree that oil is very important for an engine. I mean, you can't run it without it, but you wouldn't believe, those of you guys that aren't into rotaries as much, you won't believe how important oil is to them. On the C5, it doesn't even have an oil cooler. That was one of the things that just blew my mind, is that the oil stays so cold from a piston engine that you didn't even need to have an oil cooler, whereas I had to add 2 of my own. There's actually 3 on it. The radiator does have an oil cooler section in there as well. So it's just testament to how much oil matters to a rotary engine. More so, a lot of people don't know this, oil accounts for about 30% of the cooling in a rotary engine. Reason why is the rotors themselves absorb a lot of the heat. So what's inside of the rotors? You wouldn't believe it. Maybe now you will. Oil. Oil is used as a transfer method of heat out of the combustion chamber. Not all of it goes through the coolant. When you're balancing rotors individually, before you balance them all on an E-shaft, you see all these pockets in here, all these empty cavities, that is filled with oil, and so that changes the weight of the rotor. So when you're balancing the engine, you actually take into consideration the weight of the oil inside of the rotors. For those of you new to the channel, this is a rotor, and this contains 4 of them. They're all in there, and they're all connected through what would be considered a crankshaft, but in a rotary it's called an E-shaft. It's impressive to say that this sort of engine can crank out, at least the billet one on this engine over here, we cranked out almost 800 foot-pounds of torque at all 4 wheels, making over 1,000 horsepower, again, at all 4 wheels. We were using Garrett's 106 millimeter turbo, which 106 millimeters is the more than 4 inches, or roughly 4 inches, of diameter on this turbine blade. This turbo is capable of a lot more than that, but that was our very first dyno session. Here's the problem. This engine utilizes stock parts inside of a rotary engine. They were never meant to make that sort of power, and so they are slightly weaker than the engine that you see in here. Those parts are actually custom made. They're considered billet, which is kind of one of the running jokes in this channel, is that everything we do is billet, but you see them there. And the reason for that is they're meant to withstand more torque. So the goal for the C8 Corvette is to have this engine make 1,000 horsepower, similar to this one, but 1,000 rear wheel horsepower is not the same as 1,000 all wheel. To make 1,000 horsepower as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So using this big chunk right here, not the most efficient for only making 1,000 horsepower. We have another thing to unveil in this video. Some of you might recognize this guy before I even have a chance to say its name. This isn't even released yet. It's one of Garrett's G57 series turbos. It's new. It's the newest series. All of Garrett's newest, craziest technology is all in their G series. That is a 2nd gen turbo. This is essentially it's like a 3rd gen, but a totally different center housing. You can actually see it's all machined. It's really pretty. This is an 88 millimeter turbo, still insanely massive. That is 106 for reference. This turbo should make more than 1,000, but just over, if not maybe 1,100 on a rotary, should make about 1,000 horsepower at the wheels. But because it is a smaller compressor blade, it'll spool up even quicker, and that's the goal, the most efficient use of power band and airflow. We get to test out a turbocharger that's not even available yet. That's the exciting thing about YouTube and pushing things to the limit. We're now in a position to start doing research and development. I've been excited for the G57 series for a while, but to see it in person and to play with it, oh my God, this thing is nasty. For those of you guys that are going to consider the G57 series, you can't use the same housings from the G55. Those are different size V-bands, and things do not line up. One of the biggest differences, and something I'm very curious about, is look at that massive exhaust wheel. This exhaust wheel is actually bigger than the exhaust wheel in that one. We're gonna see how quickly that spools up, because on my 3 rotor, I used a 76 millimeter turbo and it maxed out about 780 horsepower. I then have the 80 mil on there now, and we did test an 85 mil or 84 mil and made over 1,000. So we've got a lot of choices, and this is probably by far the best of them all. So this combination right here that you're seeing right in front of you is probably the nastiest C8 Corvette waiting to be born. Back in 2015, maybe even the very end of 2014, I purchased this. This is a bolt kit. Very expensive, to be honest, but it was worth it because it does not exist. And as you can imagine, those length of those bolts correlates to the length of this engine. Unlike my 3 rotor, all of the bolts on these smaller four rotors, and I do mean smaller because they're actually more narrow, not overall engine size, just there's no fat iron, all come from the rear here and go straight through the entire motor. If you watch the videos on disassembling and reassembling that engine, you'll know that those bolts are even more insane, and they actually have a shoulder. They have a dowel built into them, and quite a few of them. The rest of them are all of this size. You'll see these two over here I set aside because they're smaller. That is the stock thickness of the bolts that go through this engine. I'll zoom in. You can see that they're distinctly thinner than these. So these are all 1/2 inch, and they need to be milled out in this block. We're going to be pretty precise on how we do that because, as you saw with the 3-rotor, we struggled with these plates not lining up, and that caused problems. Let's go ahead and take this engine down, and I'm going to show you all the things I bought back in 2014, late 2014, early 2015, to make what is really the most economical version of a 4-rotor. This block was put together back in 2016, just simply by putting 2 of the bolts in on these corners here. I have not touched it since because it was used as a mock-up engine. It was used in a variety of ways. I never got a chance to really dig into it until I took control of my own projects. Once you get to the thread, boom, they slide out like a reactor nuclear core. Fuel right there. So this is a very important moment to me. Oh, you can actually start seeing it cracking open because I haven't seen this before. So back at the end of 2014, I essentially purchased what you'd consider a starter kit. I think that's what they call them now too. A starter kit for a 4-rotor from Precision Engineering, Jeff Bruce. Jeff's actually working on my 6-rotor core right now. But that came with these irons here. Not the center one, and we'll go over that one in a second. These two and these two, the bolt kit, the eccentric shaft, and the counterweights. And just as hoped, this is brand new. So this is off of a Turbo 2, if anybody's wondering what parts these are from, and that's part of the reason it was easy to find this thing on eBay, was because this was listed as a Turbo 2 piece. Somebody that's not familiar with rotary engines wouldn't know very quickly what it is or is not. This is very interesting. I was sold, and I paid for 4 brand new housings, them to be semi-peripheral ported, as well as these to be ported, as well as a 12A iron here. That was not what I received, so this is a little bit of a disappointment. But it's funny, is this actually looks like it's never been ran either, but it's definitely not the same as the others. There's a lot of metal shavings in here. That's regrettably because this was used as a mock-up engine when most of the parts are the real parts. Short of this one and this one, everything else is the real part for this engine. A rotary engine is held in normally by these 2 dowels here, and that's exactly the case right now. She hasn't been separated in so long that it's just being held in there. Okay, ready to go off. There we go. That looks at least pretty decent. So we get to the very first piece of the puzzle, and that is this right here. Rotary engines do not ever have a bearing. That's a journal bearing. Oil, the most important nutrient in this engine, is pushed inside of there and used to support the rotating assembly. So this is added in. Jeff Bruce adds that in to this piece right here. If this was the 3-rotor engine, this would have nothing there, and then the next section of it would be where the bearing is grafted in. And this is both what makes these narrow block 4-rotors possible, but also is its weak point. I didn't realize this kit came with this. I forgot all about it. When they say a dowel kit, this is a full-length dowel running through the engine. This is hollow, and you run the bolt through the center of it. Actually, it looks like this. I'll show you. So it's kind of a 2-piece setup. And then that would screw in to the thread in the very end. So those are considered dowels, whereas the bolts that are on that engine is this thick. They're this thick, and then they're machined that way. So when I pull this off, this is actually sliding off of a long-ass dowel. Here you get to see the secret to the 4-rotor. This is what makes a short block engine possible. That is a gear, they call it a stationary gear, and this is its friend, the stationary gear on the rotor. That's what holds the rotor in place, for timing at least, as it rotates along on the eccentric shaft. So it's a combination of the lobe on the eccentric shaft and this to keep this guy behaving. That is added in after the fact. That is not present. It looks, well, I can't say it looks more like this, but it kind of does. I'll show you what these look like. They actually look a lot more like this. Just nothing in them because the eccentric shaft normally has to rotate and get in there. But it's not load bearing, there's nothing inside of them. So that's why they're a weak point, is that they're not originally designed to have load of the E-shaft slapping around. It doesn't, don't worry, it doesn't slap around, but forces acting on it. The reason I want to show you this one is this is actually a 12A iron meant for this engine. There's a lot of modification that needs to be done to it, but this is one of the missing pieces to making the engine work. On the contrary, look at this is what a fat iron traditionally looks like, and that's where the bearing is supported. So you've got one side that looks normal, and then the other side actually has the stationary gear meant to hold the third rotor. A lot of the bolts do screw in to this iron themselves, not straight through the motor. And now here we get to the good housings, one of them anyway. This is not ported. I did pay for that. Oh, look at there. You can see exactly the same thing I was just talking about with the 12A. I don't know what this iron is from. I don't know if it's good or not, but that is exactly the case. There's nothing in there, and that is literally what this is grafted to. Carl, who actually sold me this engine, as he broke quite a few of these, drifting his Fat Boy drift car, this cracks from the center out. Over 1,000 horsepower. He said under 1,000 horsepower, these things will last a long time. So that's why I've made this a non-arbitrary goal of keeping this engine at 1,000 horsepower. Now that we've gotten to the center of the engine, let me explain why this iron wouldn't work to begin with. These are the primary ports, meaning that this is where air is supposed to go to at low idle, or at least with the primary injectors. So fuel comes in right here, goes straight into the engine, straight into the engine. These are supposed to be bigger, and the reason why, these are bigger. The outer two are larger. So this is one rotor right here, right? Well, the problem is the volume of this port is much bigger than this one. That's considered the secondary port. So on this rotor, that is not the case. If you guys are familiar with the firing order of a 4-rotor, it goes 1, 3, 2, 4. And what's important about that is going from 4, the next pulse is 1 again. Problem is this. 1 is a strong pulse because there is more air going into it, and you can't run an engine lean on some of the rotors, so this has to get more fuel to accommodate for the more air. So you get strong horsepower pulse, smaller pulse, strong pulse, because this one has the other large port on the very end, found right here. So now you have strong, weak, weak, strong, strong. So this engine is now going hard, soft, hard, soft. So you get this problem with pulses of the engine being unequal. So your goal is to try and make all of the air going into each of these rotors the same. So this needs to be bigger. Unfortunately, the way that this is casted, you can't just keep cutting into this. You can't just keep drilling down. You're going to hit into these areas up here and down there. Those are water jacket areas. So you see how small this port is? See that little guy? Compare that to this guy. So again, we're not looking at the same things. We need to make a custom, very center iron. What's the situation with this engine, you might ask? Well, that was the thing I blurred out, is that engine is so unique that I think there's only one in the world that's like it, and it's not running at all. It got blown up because of a supercharger. That's a pretty impressive way to do it. Rotaries aren't notorious for having superchargers, but the very center iron on this is actually a bearing, a load-bearing iron. Similar to these are load-bearing with journal bearings. The very center of my engine here is special because it has a bearing here as well. Every single iron on that engine has a bearing. The rotating assembly can't flex from any longer distance, and that is really impressive. And that, in theory, it's an untested thing. Well, I guess it's tested now that we've made 1,000 horsepower at all wheels. That should keep the engine more stable at high horsepower, higher torque. Technically, it could be argued weaker. When you see Mad Mike, when you see any of the other 4-rotors, this is the design that they have. So we're going to go ahead with something that everybody does. That way we have more support for it, as well as the fact that I've already bought it. God, it's so weird looking at myself in this viewfinder with this haircut. Where's the C8? Well, I had 2 opportunities to get new ones, and they both fell through just because they're moving quickly. I mean, no disrespect to Logan, especially given these crazy times, but the moment that Defined AutoWorks gets the rotating assembly balanced and back to me is the moment that I'm buying a C8. I'm waiting until that happens just because machine shops take a long time, and I'm not blaming Logan. He's got somebody helping him. And again, these crazy times, it has nothing to do with that in particular. I'm not insinuating anything, but you know me, I like to move quick. And when I have to outsource something, I hope that they can get it done in a reasonable amount of time. But we're going to be assembling this motor. So no, not just rebuilding that one, but assembling this from the ground up. I'm very hopeful that that's within a month. I've got a couple leads, but if any of you see a C8 that doesn't have drift tax, I guess what would C8 drift tax be? 401k tax, golf club tax, basically the markup that is going on because it's new. Because I'm going to be taking it apart. I'm literally buying a brand new car just to take it apart. That pays off once, but not buying it for $20,000 over sticker. I've never bought a new car in my life, so I'm actually already terrified about that. That's my commitment to the channel. It's my commitment to doing something super epic, because that would be a 4-rotor mid-engined street vehicle with some nasty, nasty boost. So this is the beginning of that series. While we're working on the bodywork for this, there might be lower moments while we're taking our time perfecting the look. I want to make sure that you guys know that we've got all these projects going at full speed.